Hi, my name is Jun-E. I'm from Malaysia. I'm an independent researcher. And today I'm going to deliver this talk about the impact of artificial intelligence on human rights and link it with data. So basically what we'll talk about what is AI and what is machine learning. And we will talk also about what is human rights and what is the connection between AI and human rights. And lastly, also the Southeast Asian context when it comes to AI and human rights, specifically when it comes to data. So AI and machine learning. I thought it'd be useful to first give some definitions, even though AI has so many definitions, and this is just one of them from the World Wide Web Foundation. It says that AI is a study of devices that perceive their environment and define a course of action that will maximize its chances of achieving a given goal, basically mimicking some sort of human intelligence. But then when we talk about AI and societal implications, at the moment we're mainly referring to machine learning. So for machine learning, this is a definition and it gives you a more concrete idea of how AI can be implemented. So instead of giving computers step-by-step instructions on how to solve a problem, programmers actually give computers instructions and rules to learn from the data provided. So from what the computer can learn from the data, it then generates new rules and instructions to provide information and services. So in other words, you have algorithms generating algorithms. So regardless of what you use AI or machine learning for, this is what can go wrong if you don't have good quality data, for instance. So this is known as garbage in, garbage out. So even if the best algorithms will give outputs that are skewed if they're trained on data that is biased. The other one is a system design, and it's basically the programmer's problem where they incorporate their own values into the design, hence it is biased as well. And lastly, complex interactions. Complex interactions are like if the AI might think that certain things are important when they're not, and then they come up with different conclusions that lead to unpredictable outcomes. So these are the three main problems that could go wrong with machine learning when it comes to like human rights impacts of AI. So then I would like to actually talk a little bit about human rights, just to give like a background and context, like an anchor for us to really flesh out what we mean when we say human rights. So according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and here you can see a picture of Eleanor Roosevelt holding an English version of the UDHR of the fundamental rights of humans. If you are human, you have this list of rights, and here is a nice infographic that can lead you through that takes away all those technical terms and jargon, and you can see that there is one whole list of what you have as a human if we talk about human rights. So you should not be tortured, you should have a right to property, you have a right to freedom of religion, expression, you have the right to trial, you have the right for social security, to have like elections, and so on and so forth. So when you look at like a summing up of these different rights, there are two different types of rights. So one is the economic, social, and cultural rights, which is called ESCR in short, which includes the right to health, education, social security, proper labor conditions, quality of life, and so on and so forth. And these are actually rights that are considered as positive rights meaning that you need the state or companies and such to do something to fulfill these rights, such as providing opportunities for decent work. So the other category of human rights are civil and political rights, which includes like right to life, right to self-determination, and looks at civil freedoms such as expression, association, assembly, so on. And these are usually rights that require inaction, meaning to say that you're not supposed to do something that restricts freedom of expression, for instance. So as you can see, these are two different baskets of rights. One requires action, one requires inaction. So further on, so we have, then we can talk about a few different types of impacts that AI can have on human rights. So one, for instance, it actually brings a lot of positive impacts on, say, the right to health. Here I give an example of the coronavirus situation that we are undergoing now. And the AI can be used in a multitude of ways, for instance, to discover drugs, to detect the epidemics, to perform diagnosis, and even to monitor mental health through tweets that people put up on the internet. And so, to then be able to support appropriate policy actions for mental health, for instance. So these are good things that can happen if you use AI properly. And then you also have another situation where the intentions are good, but the implementation is bad. And then you end up with a situation where the people that you're supposed to help actually gets impacted in a negative way. So this is like a list, a number of case studies that was done by The Guardian, looking at how algorithms can punish the poor. And from this, you can actually look at it if you go into the slides, and there is a link there. And it looks at how the machines can actually end up making bad decisions when they're asked to make decisions of who deserves social protection and who doesn't. And this is the algorithmic part of it. But then also, if you look at, say, India as a case, you also have the situation where even an internet or power outage can actually bring a lot of impact on people who rely on these computers to generate a piece of paper to tell them that they actually deserve social benefits. So that there is that. And then thirdly, another thing that you can see is when AI is used for bad intentions. So the first two were for good intentions. Then this is for like so-called something that is bad, which is when you use AI against civil and political rights. So this is an example given about China on how they're using like facial recognition to profile the Uyghur Muslim minorities in the West. And then they have also concentration camps and things like that, as you know. So this is when AI is used against CPR. So what we have so far in this presentation is that your perspective on data surveillance should differ if you're looking at ESCR requiring action, or if you're looking at CPR requiring inaction, or not action that actually weaponizes AI. And so now we move along to the context of Southeast Asia. If you look at AI and economic and social and cultural rights. So in the context of Southeast Asia, we can see that governments are interested in the developmental benefits of AI. As an example, you have the ASEAN Smart Cities Network, which has 26 cities across ASEAN working together towards smart and sustainable urbanization. And this involves a lot of big data, Internet of Things, basically trying to work towards these like 6 focal areas. so including civic and social goals, health and well-being, safety and security, quality environment, built infrastructure, industry, and innovation. So a specific example would be, for instance, in Malaysia, where the Kuala Lumpur City Hall is working with Alibaba, where they're building the system called the Malaysia City Brain, where it can actually lessen the traffic congestion within Kuala Lumpur by 15%, let's say. So you can see how it brings benefits to the citizens within the city. However, the government readiness for AI really differs remarkably across the region. As you can see here, there is this AI Government Readiness Index that's generated by Oxford Insights as of 2019. And you can see that in Singapore, they're ranked world #1 in their governmental readiness. And you have all the way down to Timor-Leste, which is ranked 173. This looks at governance, infrastructure and data, skills and education, and government and public services. So how ready are our governments in using AI for administration and giving public services? This is how ready we are. Even if we're not looking at AI, if you look at internet access in Southeast Asia, it's also terribly uneven. In overall, if you look at it overall, you have 60% internet penetration, but these are not well distributed. So you have the top 4 countries, Brunei, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, where it's above 80% of the population are covered. Even though there are other countries with bigger populations, so these are just some ideas of the figures. And then you look at the bottom 3 countries such as Laos, Myanmar, Timor-Leste, which have about 30+% of internet penetration, which means that many of these people within these countries who don't even have basic access to the internet are not participating in data generation, even if they might be affected by data-driven policies, for instance, with the ASEAN Smart Cities Network. So you can also see, for example, this is an example of how good data is scarce in Southeast Asia. Remember, we were talking about how data is important, right? So in an execution of a good machine learning application, you need good data. And so here you can see an example of the Philippines, who together with Indonesia have adopted the Open Data Charter. As part of 30 other governments did that too. And Philippines was scored at 42 and Indonesia was scored at 37 on publishing and using open data for accountability, innovation, and social impact. So these are, you can see from the image, these are the criteria of what is considered as good data. Is it available? Is it machine readable? Is it free? Is it up to date? Things like that. So that's really not there yet in Southeast Asia. And it doesn't only affect like the application of AI, but it also does affect programmers who are building these applications, because it's very important to have good access to good data. And if they don't have access to good data in Southeast Asia, even if the application is for Southeast Asia, they might actually use other data from somewhere else, say from Europe or the US, to train the applications, which then don't apply to the local context. So that is basically AI and ESCR in Southeast Asia. And now we look at the context of Southeast Asia when it comes to AI and civil and political rights. So here we can see, firstly, that most of our governments, unfortunately, tilt towards authoritarianism. So none of our 11 countries in the region actually received a rating higher than obstructed from Civicus Monitor, which monitors civic spaces. So they have like 5 rankings: closed, repressed, obstructed, narrowed, and open. So none of us are above obstructed, which is like level 3. And also, none of the 8 countries assessed within the Freedom on the Net report in 2018 obtained a free status in internet freedom. So we're mainly not free or partially free only. So we can also see that most of our governments within the region engage in digital surveillance, and this is data from the AI Global Surveillance Index. We don't have data on Brunei, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Timor-Leste, but basically the trend is quite clear that all across Southeast Asia we were having smart city or safe city initiatives, facial recognition, smart policing, as some forms of surveillance that governments are actually conducting on their civilians or citizens in physical space. Most of this technology is coming from China and to a lesser extent from the US as well. And other forms of surveillance also take in the form of social media surveillance, which uses AI to collect and process personal data and metadata from social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter. So the Freedom on the Net report of 2019 states that most of the countries, Asian countries that it covers, have a social media surveillance program. So yeah, it's quite a problem in Southeast Asia as well. And lastly, on CPR, we are also seeing a trend of disinformation campaigns and micro-targeting in terms of political ads. And this has the potential of actually threatening the foundations of our democracy, which was not very strong in the beginning anyway. So there are a couple of different reports as examples that I've included here. One is that in the 2019 Philippine midterm election, Facebook booths were used to not only advertise Facebook pages of official candidates and reach very targeted, audiences. It was also used to promote, negative content or disinformation campaigns sometimes about political opponents. And in Indonesia as well, experts were warning of voter behavior targeting. This would be a problem when it comes to civil and political rights, because elections are important for us to make sure that we vote people that we want to vote in. So now we concentrate a little bit on data surveillance. At this point, I guess there are three main things that I can see. One is data colonialism. And as you can see here from the graphic, there are like a very visible trend moving towards internet leaders who are based in two main countries, the US and China. So from the US, you have Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and then from China, you have Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, and all the others. And this is kind of leading towards a form of colonialism coming from two very different angles, US and China. But the basic idea is that it is extracting data as how you would extract resources like oil and forests in traditional colonialism, but now in a digital space. And then you use them to profit, and how surveillance capitalism is how. So basically how it works is that companies try to keep the users on their platform, and this is what we call the attention economy, where more and more users are just stuck on their platforms, and how they scroll, how they click, and all that are actually absorbed as data collection. And this data is analyzed through AI and machine learning. And then the analysis from this and the generation of algorithms are actually converted into products that predict human behavior. And when you have this information of, say, how a country's citizens might vote for or against a certain candidate, or even just to buy stuff, how likely this person is to change from this brand to another, you can then use this information to either reinforce the direction, to push it towards a different candidate, like political candidate, or to change the person's choice, through offering different types of content to this person. So it's also used to socially sort people, and is used to change people's behavior. And this, as you can imagine, is very useful for generating profit. So in terms of what other data problems we have, one of the key things, as I think that it came across quite clear before when we're looking at Southeast Asia, is that there is a digital divide between those who have access to the internet and those who don't. And as an extension as well, these people are sometimes included, sometimes excluded from data sets. And I thought that this quote from Lehrman, 2013, just sort of sums it up very, very well. So in the future, where public policy and marketplace will be shaped significantly by data and predictions that data makes possible, the exclusion of the poor and marginalized people have implications. So it affects their economic opportunities, it affects their social mobility, it affects their citizenship, even in political engagement. And these technologies then create a new form of voicelessness. In which the preferences and behavior of the poor people or marginalized people have little or no consideration when companies or governments make decisions that affect their lives. So as most of our applications are actually imported from China and the US, where things are already not catered for our local context, our local languages, for instance, we also have to understand and make sure that those without access to being part of the data, for instance, are still counted when the data is churned to make decisions connected to economic, social, and cultural rights. And then lastly, you can also see that China is exporting its digital authoritarianism, and as we have seen from an earlier table, we are importing a lot of technology for surveillance from China, and Freedom House actually looks at three areas that China is doing its exportation from, in terms of its infrastructure, towers and things like that, and its software for surveillance, and also training on how to use the software. So here you can see a map of what's happening. In Southeast Asia, you have, for instance, Vietnam is talking about training Vietnamese officials, and then also media staff from the Philippines, and Thai journalists, and Malaysian police, all of that. So yeah, it's not looking well for civil and political rights when it comes to AI and data in the region, if we were all importing not only the technology but also the ideologies of China. So the key takeaways from this lecture, I think that I would like to impress upon you guys, is that the first is that data surveillance is not a binary good or bad, because the tool can be used for good or bad, and it can be used well or badly. So it is really quite nuanced. So to use AI for good, to enhance ESCR, we need to have quality and open data, and include everyone, and make sure that there are no biases, or if there are biases, we know how to fix it. And to protect people from malicious uses of AI against CPR, we need to look at privacy. We need to look at how our government or powerful parties have access to data, how they're using it, and how to stop them from using it in a malicious way. So lastly, Southeast Asia really needs to be part of the global conversation on AI and data governance. Even though we're also trying to generate homegrown AI, the fact remains that most of our technology is still imported from the US or China. So this is basically the end of my presentation. Thank you. And the slides can be accessed at this link. And I've included all of the hyperlinks and things like that, so you can click through and explore if you want. Thank you.